Yo, what's up, nerds? It's MTG Man, and welcome to a deck completely unrelated to anything else I've been covering. This is not Aether Drift spoilers. I know, to all the newcomers, because we've had a lot of newcomers recently. Big disappointment. But this is a, well, I don't know what I was thinking. I was just thinking, this is Oops All Damage. So, every card in this deck, does damage, and or is a basic land. So the deck plays basic lands and then lands that deal damage, and every other card either has to deal damage or make an opponent lose life. No exceptions. No, I lose 2 life off of it, so it's technically life loss. No, this is just about burn, kind of, as fast as possible. So let's just get into it. Commander-wise, we're playing Daragaz the Igniter. So 6 mana, 6/6 flyer. When it deals combat damage to a player, you can pay 2 and a red. If you do, you choose a color, then that player reveals his or her hand, and Daragaz deals damage to that player equal to the number of cards of a color chosen revealed this way. So if you attack a mono blue player, you have them reveal their hand, and there's like 3 blue cards and an island, then you deal 3 damage. It's like mediocre, okay? It's really hard to find a commander in the colors I want that does damage, because these were the colors I wanted. I wanted the colors first. The commander kind of came second here. My bad. So moving into the what I'm calling the once per turn burn, these are either dealing damage on your upkeep or your opponent's upkeep. So Creeping Bloodsucker will deal 1 to each opponent, and you gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. Klothys, at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you exile a card from a graveyard, and if it wasn't a land, you add red or green, and otherwise you gain 2 life and deal 2 damage to each opponent. So it's just another way to burn. It can also ramp you if you need it. Magus, so at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, it deals 2 damage to them unless they sacrifice a creature. Ancient Runes, during each player's upkeep, it deals 1 damage to that player for each artifact they control. Enchanter's Bane, at the beginning of your end step, target enchantment deals damage equal to its mana value to its controller unless that player sacrifices it. Primal Order, during each player's upkeep, Primal Order deals damage to that player equal to the amount of non-basic lands they control. Roiling Vortex, each player's upkeep deals 1 damage to them. If a player casts a spell and no mana was spent to cast it, it deals 5 damage to that player. And you can pay red to have your opponents can't gain life. Sulfuric Vortex, the beginning of each player's upkeep deals 2 damage, and if a player would gain life, they gain no life. Basically how this deck works is in quotation marks here. Let's just be real. This deck goes, okay, turn 1, I play a thing that burns whenever blank. Turn 2, I play a thing that burns blank. Basically, your board doesn't look threatening because it's 1 damage here, 2 damage here, and then you have these big sweepers that can kind of just finish off a game once everybody's low. Things like Backlash, where you tap target untap creature, that creature deals damage equal to its power to its controller. If you're facing like a green deck, green decks get big all the time. They could have a 10-10 on the board. I say, I tap your 10-10, that's 10 damage, and that could just finish off a game. Mage's Contest, less so. You and target spell's controller bid life. You start with 1, and then you go back and forth, and then if you win the bid, you counter the spell, and if they win the bid, they just get to cast it. Basically, it's another way to just make your opponents give up life. Price of Progress deals 2 damage to each player for each non-basic land they control. You have a handful of non-basics, but this is going to hurt your opponents probably a lot more than it hurts you. Shriveling Rot, so it does 2 things. You can either, whenever a creature is dealt damage, destroy it. We don't care about this, because all we care about is damage. Or, until end of turn, whenever a creature dies, that creature's controller loses life equal to its toughness. Shriveling Rot can kind of just be this, like, kill 2 players thing. If one player decides they're going to full swing at whoever the main threat is, you say, okay, I play Shriveling Rot once blockers are declared, and now anything that dies is just burn, burn, burn. It can kind of just finish off 2 players at once if you can get them to full swing at each other. Acidic Soil deals 1 damage to each player for each land he or she controls. Again, this is not really going to hurt you because you don't do a lot of ramp. Other players do ramp, so when the green deck has like 24 Assault, bam, Acidic Soil for 20 damage. Exsanguinate is just a good burn spell, burns everybody else at the table. Well, it's technically life loss, not burn. Um, and then you gain life equal to life loss that way. Prisoner's Dilemma. I'm not gonna explain this one. Just read it. Pause. Read it for yourself. Because it's kind of hard to explain, but it can be a good amount of burn depending on how the opponents play it. Um, this next category is like burn when. So whenever something happens, whenever blank happens, you burn. Balewinter Leech is going to burn each opponent for 1 whenever an enchantment enters. The deck plays like 25 enchantments. Bloodseeker, whenever a creature enters under an opponent's control, you can have that player lose 1 life. Brash Taunter, this isn't quite a burn when, but when it's dealt damage, it'll deal that much damage to a target opponent. This kind of just makes your opponents think about attacking you, because it's like, okay, if I attack with my 10/10, they're also taking 10 damage, you know? Burning Tree Shaman, whenever a player activates an ability that isn't a mana ability, Burning Tree Shaman deals 1 damage to that player. Cemetery Gatekeeper, you exile a card from a graveyard, and whenever a player plays a land or casts a spell that shares a card type with the exiled card, it deals 2 damage to that player. Just another way to keep burning them down. Eidolon and the Great Revel, whenever a player casts a spell with converted mana cost 3 or less, it deals 2 damage to them. If you've noticed, we have a lot of these like small ones, so by turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, you have a handful of these on the board, and then you just kind of build them up, so every time the opponent does something, they just get burned more and more. Gleeful Arsonist, whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, deals damage equal to its power to that player. Harsh Mentor, whenever an opponent activates an ability of an artifact, creature, or land, and it isn't a mana ability, it deals 2 damage to that player. Heartless Hidetsugu, not a burn when, I don't know how this got in the category, but basically you tap it, and it deals damage to each player equal to half that player's life total rounded down. So it's just a way to get a huge chunk of burn in, and can kind of just lead to you finishing off a game sooner. Iridescent Vine Lasher, it'll deal 1 damage to target opponent whenever you have a land enter. You don't have a lot of like fetch lands or anything like that, but being able to just deal 1 extra every turn can kind of add up. It's also just nice to have a turn 1 play. Karavek the Merciless, whenever an opponent casts a spell, deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target. So if they play a 4-drop, you deal 4 damage, and then they play a 5-drop, you deal 5 damage. And it's just a way to just keep building up burn damage. Carter Doomscourge, we don't really care, well, sometimes we care about when it enters, creatures your opponents control attack each combat and attack a player other than you. But then also, whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. Just a way to burn them out from attacking. Cataract Parasite, whenever an opponent draws a card, if you control a red permanent, you probably will. It'll deal 1 damage to that player, so it's just going to burn them for drawing. Magebane Lizard, whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, Magebane Lizard deals damage to that player equal to the number of non-creature spells they've cast this turn. This is just going to burn over time, plus it kind of just counteracts storm decks. So any deck that's trying to storm off Magebane Lizard says hell nah to. Mindsparker, 3 mana 3/2. Whenever an opponent casts a white or blue instant or sorcery, deals 2 damage to that player, just more damage. Razorkin Needlehead, whenever an opponent draws a card, deals 1 damage to them, just more burn. Rug of Smothering, whenever a player casts a spell, they lose 1 life for each spell they've cast this turn. Shuts down Storm again, and it's just going to continuously burn. Screaming Nemesis, when it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any target, and if a player is dealt damage this way, they can't gain life for the rest of the game. So this can kind of like shut off life gain strategies that would kind of counteract your burn. Plus, being able to be like, okay, I block your 10/10, you take 10 damage, can kind of just be nuts. Scytheclaw Raptor, 2 in a red for a 4/3, and whenever a player casts a spell, if it's not their turn, it deals 4 damage to them. If you've noticed, some of these burn effects are going to be hurting you too, and you only have so many ways to gain back life, but theoretically you just burn faster than your opponent. The Lord of Pain, so I mean this was a pre-con commander. This would be a good commander for the deck if we didn't want green, but whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, you choose another target player, and Lord of Pain deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to the chosen player. This can hurt you, but it's just very chaotic, very cool. Tunnel Ignis, whenever a land enters under an opponent's control, if they had another land enter onto the battlefield this turn, it deals 3 damage to that player. So it hurts your opponents for like fetch lands, evolving wilds, even if they just explore to play an extra land, Tunnel Ignis is going to hurt them. Vengeful Tracker, whenever an opponent sacrifices an artifact, it deals 2 damage to them. This is really going to add up with like the clues, treasure, food, all that. Ankh of Mishra, whenever a land comes into play, it deals 2 damage to that land's controller. Psychogenic Probe, whenever a spell or ability causes a player to shuffle their library, it deals 2 damage to them. Leyline of Combustion is kind of just going to protect your stuff, because whenever you and or at least one permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability, deals 2 damage to the player that controls that spell or ability. So if they want to remove your burn pieces, they're just going to take more damage, plus you can cast it for free if it's in your opening hand. Maddening Hex, you enchant a player. When enchanted player casts a non-creature spell, you roll a d6, deals damage to that player equal to the result, and then attach it to another one of your opponents chosen at random. Just kind of a way to spread burn across the table. Mana Barbs, whenever a player taps a land for mana, deals 1 damage to them. Really adds up. Same with Overabundance, where whenever a player taps a land for mana, they add 1 additional mana to their mana pool of the same type, and it deals 1 damage to them. Sure, everybody's adding double mana, which can hurt because your deck might not be able to take double mana as well as other decks can, but 1 damage every time they tap a land is still pretty strong. Painful Quandary, whenever an opponent casts a spell, they lose 5 life unless they discard a card. It kind of gives your opponent the choice of discarding a card instead, but can still just burn a shit ton over time. Pyrostatic Pillar, whenever a player casts a spell with converted mana cost 3 or less, it deals 2 damage to that player. Again, burn over time. Revenge of Ravens, whenever a player attacks you or a planeswalker you control, they lose a life, you gain a life, punishes them for attacking you. Scald, kind of a more specific one, but whenever a player taps an island for mana, it deals 1 damage to that player. You can't really, like, it's not like there's a, a way to make all your opponent's lands islands or anything, but still just being able to hurt that one blue player is going to be pretty nice. Spell Shock, whenever a player successfully casts a spell, Spell Shock deals 2 damage to them. Moving into the next section, these are all ways to draw more cards, but it's also going to burn the table. So Scrawling Crawler, at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card, so you can draw extra cards. And then whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose a life. Stormfist Crusader, at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card and loses a life. Browbeat, so any player may have Browbeat deal 5 damage to them, and if no one does, you draw 3 cards. Your opponents will probably have it deal 5 damage to them. Let's be real. That's probably what's going to happen. You're probably not getting 3 cards, but you could get 3 cards. Grab the Prize, you discard a card, draw 2, and if the discard wasn't a land, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. Wheel of Misfortune, sure, technically Wheel of Misfortune isn't guaranteed to burn. Your opponents could all choose 0, but being able to wheel is still going to be really nice for you, especially because this deck can kind of run out of gas. There's only so much drawing you can do. Spiteful Visions, at the beginning of each player's draw step, they draw an additional card, and whenever a player draws a card, it deals 1 damage to that player. So this will also hurt you, but it's fine because you need the draw. Moving into ramp, we have Zerta Druid, which is basically just a regular mana dork, but when you tap it for mana, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Atarka's Command, because it can do a couple things, but what you're really going to want to do is deal 3 damage to each opponent, and put a land from your battlefield, or put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. You could also have your opponents be unable to gain life, or give your creatures +1/+1, really whatever you need in this scenario, but that's probably going to be what you're doing. Exploding Borders, you search your library for a basic land, put it into play tap, then shuffle your library. Exploding Borders deals X damage to target player, where X is the number of basic lands among basic land types among lands you control. So it'll deal 3 damage. It'll bolt someone to the face and search for a land. We really didn't have any other ways to search for lands, so Exploding Borders was a shoo-in. World Soul's Rage. I can't even really... I don't know if this is ramp or not, but X red-green deals X damage to any target. Put up to X lands from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. It's just a theoretical way to put more lands on the battlefield. It'll probably never be used that way. I mean, I guess, granted, being able to say, okay, I pay 4, deal 2 damage to target player, and then put 2 lands from the graveyard onto the battlefield really isn't that bad of a rate, but that also means you have lands in the graveyard, which is not guaranteed. Descend to Avernus. At the beginning of your upkeep, put 2 descent counters onto Descend to Avernus. Then each player creates X treasure tokens, and Descend to Avernus deals X damage to each player, where X is the number of Descent counters on Descend to Avernus. So you play it on turn 3. Then turn 4, everybody creates 2 treasures, takes 2 damage. And on turn 5, everybody creates 4 treasures, takes 4 damage. And it just keeps going up and up and up. And this is going to let you like kind of power out your burn pieces, while also burning every player over time. So it's kind of everything the deck wants. Moving into removal, Dash Hopes is any player may pay 5 life, and if that player does, you counter Dash Hopes. And if they don't, you just get to counter target spell. It kind of can be a counter spell if they just don't pay the 5 life, but they probably will pay the 5 life, let's be real. Destructive Revelry destroys an artifact or enchantment and deals 2 damage to that permanent's controller. Glissa's Scorn, 1 and a green, destroy target artifact and its controller loses 1 life. Rakdos Charm can either destroy target artifact, exile a player's graveyard, or each creature deals 1 damage to its controller, which can kind of just kill a player if they have a board full of tokens, and can be super useful. Moving more removal. Pathesis. Basically, you just want to suspend this turn 5, and then on turn 7, if you even last that long, you'll get to destroy something, and its controller loses life equal to its power plus its toughness. Which, again, could just kind of take a player out of the game, because they're like, okay, I'm at 12 life. 12 life seems like a fair bit. And then you're like, wrong, I Pathesis, you're 6/6, and, well, 6 plus 6 is 12, and then they take 12 damage, and then they die. Pathesis is kind of going to slow down the game as well, because your opponents are going to have to think about, okay, they have that suspended. I have 2 turns with this creature, and that's it. Soul Reap destroys target 9 green creature, and its controller loses 3 life if you played another black spell this turn. Cindervines, whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, Cindervines deals 1 damage to that player, and then you can sacrifice it to destroy an artifact or enchantment and deal 2 damage to that permanent's controller. Kind of just burns over time, and then you can sack it if you need to remove something. Moving into lands, we have Barbarian Ring, because you can sack it to deal 2 damage to any target. We play all of the deserts that deal 1 damage to target opponent. Forests, Immersum, Skullcairn, because it can deal 3 damage to target player. Keldon, Megaliths, because you can tap it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Leechridden Swamp, because you can pay a black and tap it, and each opponent loses a life. Mountain Doom, because you can pay 1 black-red, deal 1 damage to each opponent. Mountains, Piranha Marsh, because it enters and target player loses a life. Ruinap Ruins, because you can sack a desert and deal 2 damage to each opponent. Shiving Gorge, because you can pay 2 in a red and deal 1 damage to each opponent. Stensia Bloodhall, because you can pay 3 black-red and deal 2 damage to target player. And then Swamps. If you notice, the land base sucks, because my constriction was basic lands and things that deal damage. And you might even be better off without the damage lands. That's kind of up for interpretation. I think we keep this because Leyline of Combustion, opening hand, hello? So we go Leyline of Combustion. We play a Leechridden Swamp tapped, pass. Then we go into Bloodseeker. So now whenever they play a creature, they'll take 1 damage. I think we have to play this tapped. Not ideal. Move into turn 4. Swamp again. Play an Enchanter's Bane so we can start dealing damage for our opponent's enchantments. I was really hoping for another land so we could play Baneful Quandary, or a green land so we could either ramp or Burning Tree Shaman, but we're just a little stuck here. So I guess we would just tap, pay a black, each opponent loses a life, then we go Swamp, Painful Quandary, and then just start burning them out with Painful Quandary. Not really how the deck's looking to play. Mulligan, I guess we'd probably have to keep this as well, because I don't want to mulligan again. So we keep this, we go Skullcairn, tapped, pass. Forest, we play Ankh of Mishra, so now whenever a player plays a land, they will be dealt 2 damage. So I guess we're dealt 2 damage. We can Soul Reap something if we need to remove a non-green creature. This turn, I think we go Magebane Lizard, Soul Reap something. Lord of Pain, So at this point, whenever a player plays a land, they lose 2 life. And then whenever they cast a non-creature spell, Magebane Lizard deals damage to that player equal to the number of non-creature spells they've cast this turn. And then when they play their first spell, we choose another target player, and it deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to the chosen player. Basically, you just want to keep adding these effects to the board, where, let me be real here, this deck looks like it should be played by an idiot. Like, this looks like it should be played by a caveman that's like, damage, 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 you know? But I don't think a caveman has the mental capacity to be like, okay, on my upkeep, there's a sulfuric vortex and a roiling vortex. And then when I play my land, there's an Ankh of Mishra trigger, and then blah, blah, blah. Because there's so many different triggers going off for different things that the deck itself is kind of like a mind game of trying to remember everything that's on your board. Remembering that certain lands that you tap are going to deal damage to you, remembering to, lose life off of your own burn shit. Like, if you're like Enchanter's Bane, the nice thing about Enchanter's Bane is that if there are no other enchantments that opponents control, we can kind of just target itself and just take 2 damage if we want to keep it around. So you go pass. We're having a really big trouble because, like, when I was playtesting this deck earlier today, I had a lot of turn 1 nothing, turn 2 2-drop burn thing, turn 3 3-drop burn thing, and then turn 4 2-drop burn things. And that just, like, does not seem to be happening. So I think we play Mana Barbs. Or maybe we run out Spiteful... Not Prisoner's Dilemma. Spiteful Vision, so that on our next turn we get to draw an extra card. And I guess at this point we could... we'd hold on to that. We would grab the prize, discard Revenge of Ravens, so it deals 2 damage each opponent, draw 2 cards. There's still no more lands, so I guess we go Shivan Gorge. We play Descent to Avernus. Go to turn 6, we will get to draw an extra card off Spiteful Visions, then Descent to Avernus will create 2 treasures, and then, I guess from here we can just start casting things with the treasures, and, we have 5 lands. So we could Prisoner's Dilemma, we could Primal Order, because that's probably going to hurt our opponents a lot more than it's going to hurt us. Let me be real. The commander kind of sits there, right? My problem was, originally, I didn't have Daragaz. I had, Vial Smasher, and then I wanted green, right? And green is where this deck dies. Let me be real here. Green is not important. Green is because I wanted to play green, like, really badly. Because I wanted Cinder Vines, and I wanted those kind of cards. And the problem with green is, there's no green partner that can, like, burn. So therefore, I'm breaking that whole, like, all of my cards deal damage rule. So then I got rid of Vial Smasher. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to look at black, red, green. And then I'm going to go Legends. And, like, there's some options here, but none of them really burn. Doesn't burn. Well, when it's dealt damage, choose an opponent at random, and it deals damage equal to its power to that player unless they sacrifice a non-token creature of their choice. Not, like, the worst option, but, like, meh. Doesn't burn. Yurlok does burn, but then I would just be building a Yurlok deck, Winter doesn't burn. Lord Windgrace can not burn. Shattergang Brothers doesn't burn. Like, you see what I mean? Like, that's the problem. I guess Indoraptor really isn't a terrible choice for this, but you're not really getting anything off of the Bloodthirst ability. Like, it's definitely more of a gimmicky, I want to have fun deck Like, this is the kind of thing I bring to a table, and everybody, like, shakes their head. But I would be having a blast. Honestly, I love the kind of Magic where I have to, like, constantly be thinking, like, okay, they cast a spell, time for them to take damage. It's like Ristic Study, except instead of pay the 1, it's you take 2 damage, and you take 3 damage, and you take more damage. That's just all about damage, because I think damage is fun, personally. See, like, this is more my speed, because you go turn 3 into either Spell Shock, or Ancient Runes, or Rug of Smothering. I think we'd probably go Spell Shock. Right, and then turn 4, we can either Rug of Smothering, Acidic Soil if we really wanted to, or Ancient Runes. So I think Rug of Smothering. So now whenever a player casts a spell, they take 2 damage from Spell Shock, and then they take 1 damage for each spell they've cast, so at least 1. And then if it's under mana value 3, they take another 2 damage. So the first spell they cast with mana value 1 or 2, or 3, will deal 5 damage to them. And then if they cast a second one, that'll be another 5 damage. 6 damage, because of Rug of Smothering. And it's just going to keep going up. And I think there's something really fun about that. I think there's something fun about a very rude, very burn type of deck. And I mean, we've definitely seen it before. Like, there is the Endless Punishment. You know, we have these, like, I think somebody called it, like, a Tunnel of Needles decks. Where, like, yeah, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but, like, you're walking through a tunnel of needles. That shit ain't gonna feel good, you know? I think that's definitely, like, a fun way of, putting the deck, you know? That being said, this has been MTG Man. I'm gonna go back to Aether Drift stuff. Don't worry, I know everybody wants their Aether Drift, but, this has just been one of those little side things. Cause, you know, I love Commander. I've been playing Commander for years now. I just got a Heir Apparent deck together. But, like, it's really boring sometimes building, like, high-power Commander decks. I don't even want to say high-power, but, like, my budget decks, whatever. Because a lot of the same cards go into every Commander deck. You know, every Commander deck has a Soul Ring, every Commander deck has an Arcane Signet, and as much as I could be that person to just not include it, I'd be making the deck worse, for 1. And for 2, it's not that I don't enjoy that gameplay. Like, I enjoy turn 2 Arcane Signet into turn 3 4-drop. That's, like, one of my favorite things about Commander, which is really stupid to say out loud, but I mean, like, I enjoy the play pattern. It's just, it kind of makes deck building less fun when it's like, okay, here are 30 slots. These 30 slots are probably some of the same removal we see every time, some of the same card draw, a lot of the same ramp, because I only really play, like, Mana Rocks and Rampant Growth, outside of, like, certain scenarios, you know? That's why I really enjoyed things like when I was doing Kitchen Table Showdown, which, you know, I've possibly been working on a couple decks for. Let me be real. Let me, because I just enjoy doing something different. Or, like, I've been reading the Magic the Gathering manga recently, Destroy All Humans That Can't Be Regenerated, and I've taken up, like, a really big interest in, like, the pre-2000 era of Magic. So, like, I've tried, like, building decks from that era, building decks from, like, the era that, you know, the book is specifically from. I've tried building cubes. I enjoy Magic as a hobby, but, like, sometimes I need to see a different side of it to start enjoying it again. You know, like, I sold my collection back in July, I think. Was it July or August? For, like, I want to say I got $6,000, but I got a lot of money. A lot of that was spent on a girl I don't see anymore. You know, there's some sadness to that, but also, like, now that I don't have a huge collection weighing me down where I have to build cards, I have to build decks from the cards I have, and I can be like, okay, if I build a deck with a $100 budget, I can buy those cards. You know, I have a job. I can do whatever I need. That being said, this has been MTG Man. signing off. Let me know what Aether Drift cards are you excited to see. I've been looking at building a deck with Pia's Revolution and the new Chandra. Pretty interesting. But that being said, I'll see you in the next one. I'll see you newcomers in the next one, and peace out.